Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university. Well, hi everybody. Welcome to State of Wellbeing. I'm Caitlin Walters, the Wellbeing Specialist. Joining me today, we have two folks from Housing and Residential Life. Would you mind introducing yourselves?
Hi, I'm Becky Peterson. I'm the Director of Housing and Residential Life.
I'm Nathaniel Condelli. I'm the Assistant Director for Residential Life.
And we thought we would come in and just talk about relationships with roommates and living here on campus. So I'm really excited to have you all join us and bring your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how long you've been working in Housing and Residential Life and maybe why you continue to work here?
Sure. I started my 20th year in Housing and Residential Life, aside from about a year and a half in student conduct, this past fall. And what keeps me going in housing is our students are phenomenal on every campus I've worked at. They are amazingly talented and hardworking, and just really here to pursue their very best selves. And in housing in particular, no 2 days are ever the same, right? And there's a lot of variety that exists in our roles. So you might be working on a building project, or you might be helping a student navigate a tricky situation, or you might be planning next year's opening. So for me, it's the variety, but also the people that I get to work with.
Yeah, I've been working in student affairs for 7 to 8 years, and most of that has been within Housing and Residential Life. And I would say for me, I was a first-generation college student, and so access to education is really one of my passion areas. And Housing and Residential Life, where somebody lives, can impact their ability to be successful as a student. And so being able to help navigate that impact on top of all of the other things that Becky talked about, the wonderful people we work with, but being able to make that student impact on them being able to be successful and live in an environment that helps them succeed is really important to me.
Yeah, I think y'all do such amazing work in Housing and Residential Life. And oftentimes I think we just think of it as like, oh, that's where I stay. Like I live there. But we don't think about all the programming and all of the effort that goes on behind the scenes. So thank you for all the work that you both do. So getting into roommates, I wanted to ask kind of just kicking it off. I know a lot of people who are listening to this have probably been already living with their roommate for a few weeks now. But what are some good ways to get to know your roommate a little bit better if maybe you're having a hard time breaking that ice with your roommate?
Yeah, I think I like to lean on kind of some of our experiences, and I think that's really helpful in what we do. So for me personally, I knew my freshman roommate going into my college experience and was really good friends in high school, was probably one of the reasons I chose to go to SDSU, was for sure the reason I chose the hall that I was living in and like let him kind of navigate most of that. But even like having all of those, almost feeling like I'm set up for success, still led to some challenges of like, I've never lived with this person before. He wakes up really early and likes to practice guitar. I like to sleep in. Our class schedules were very different. And so it was just one of those things where, we always had conversation, right? Being at the same high school or those pieces, having known him, and being able to really navigate easy conversation. But when you have any sort of level of conflict, it feels like really this like huge mountain to climb, right? Even if it's as small as, hey, can we adjust this one alarm, or can we have the lights off at this time? Even if it's those just one small little details that could help make a big difference. And oftentimes, right, like we're putting those barriers for ourselves there first, right? And so being willing to have that conversation with a roommate and just bring that up in the first place is a really positive piece. So that way you're not putting that barrier for yourself there before you even gave somebody else the opportunity to say, oh, I can make that adjustment, right? Sometimes it's not always met with I can make that adjustment, and then there's opportunities to help, CAs can help navigate maybe conflict where that can't be adjusted or a middle ground can't be found, right? And there's opportunities for that. But being willing just to put something out and legitimately put something out, not on a sticky note, not in a passive way, but legitimately putting out what that concern is in a positive, proactive way is important.
In addition to what Nathaniel said, I think about, right, it's never too late to try, right? So starting with something small and spending that time, like seeing if your roommate wants to walk to the union with you and grab something to eat, or if you need to go run to Walmart, maybe they want to ride along with you and grab a few things. And those small moments add up, and being able to spend the time investing in that relationship is important. I think about, the adage of the best way to have a friend is to be a friend, right? So instead of maybe leaving a sticky note about who's taking out the trash, it's you actively taking out the trash and saying to your roommate, okay, I got it this time, you got it next time, right? And some of the ways to reduce those barriers of those, scary things. One of the things we try and be intentional with is roommate agreements. And so if you haven't done a roommate agreement, we encourage you to do one. If you need one, your community assistant has one. And even just using that as a framework to have this conversation about lighting or heating and cooling, or times in which guests are coming and going, it can really give you a tool to kind of start that conversation. Because the reality is you're going to be living with someone most of this year as if you're a first-year student, and next year as a returning student. So building those skills now is going to make your experience so much better moving forward.
I think that's such a good point. I think of like the garbage, and they talk about this often, not even just in roommates, but like when you have a partner later on in life. But oftentimes I think people think that they shouldn't have to say it like, hey, I got the garbage this time, it's your time next time. They think like, oh, I'll just do it, and they'll notice it, and they'll realize it's their turn. But I think it's really important to have that clear, hey, and it doesn't have to be like snappy, it doesn't have to be rude. It can just be, hey, I grabbed the garbage this time, your turn next time, right? I think that's a really important point of just like clear, simple communication, not sticky notes, because the passive aggressiveness. Yes, for sure.
We know that most people aren't mind readers, right? So like being able to politely say these things, and like you said, doing it now gives you those skills kind of later on. So.
And I think maybe being willing to ask, I always think of like being willing to ask, is there anything I could do that would make this better? Because I think sometimes it's always about, oh, I'm frustrated about these things. But if we're willing to like open it up first of, what could I do to make our living situation more comfortable for both of us? Opening it up for yourself first might give you the opportunity to also then give some feedback, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, and both you brought up a really good point with the, life skills later on, or living with a partner later on, right? You have 10 months that you're living with somebody that you have an opportunity to learn. There's student staff members and professional staff members that are there to help people navigate different conflicts, right? And that is one of the only time in your life that you'll have the same support system that you have while you're living on campus to help navigate some of those pieces. But more than likely, right, a lot of people are going to have opportunities to live with maybe long-term roommates, family, spouses, and these skills are going to be lifelong skills that people can take, right? And now is an opportunity to learn those skills, try something of how you want to live in your living space, right? There's a lot of opportunity there, and a lot they can take forward.
When I think we talk a lot about in our department about boundaries, right? Like you as a roommate get to communicate some of your boundaries, right? But the emphasis is on the communication piece, right? But then you also get to hear what your roommate might need, and how do you two come together to navigate what you both need to be successful in that environment. Now, some of it is irreconcilable differences and people need a room change, but for the most part, some of this simple stuff can be managed.
Well, and it's important to practice setting your own boundaries, but it's also important to learn how to respect other people's boundaries, because it can be a skill, like there can be a learning curve to even just learning how to respect those boundaries. You might seem like that's like pretty straightforward, but when you hear something that maybe, oh, that's a boundary that I don't hold for myself, like I'm going to have to learn to adjust to that. I think it's really important. So when I was in college, first year student, I had a roommate and we got along pretty well, but we had very different schedules. And this was kind of right when YouTube came out, so she was really interested in watching YouTube all night. And so the room was always kind of like a soft YouTube glow because she was on her computer until about 5 a.m. And I, instead of saying anything, I just kind of held on to the frustration for the entire semester. And then when it was time to move out, I said, I'll never live, with a roommate ever again. And I moved out. How could I, or how can we respectfully navigate those differences in schedules, whether it be like we have different preferences on sleep schedules or study schedules, or just kind of differences in like what our schedule and what our use of the room looks like?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces is looking at, one, what are the opportunities for different spaces in the halls that can be suitable for some of those, activities, right? There are study rooms, lounges, or other spaces that can be utilized, right? We don't close them down at a certain time at night, right? There's lots of people that have opportunities there. Obviously, we have, some quiet hours or those types of things once we hit certain periods in the night, but there's opportunities for people to study or watch YouTube videos, especially if they're using headphones and other spaces throughout our community. And that could be a good bridge to approach it of, hey, have you thought about, for you're watching videos that late at night, could you, use a space that's not in our room? I think one of the other pieces that is really important to kind of recognize, and it's hard, right, because all of the students are going through this at the same time, but you just transitioned from a household that probably has or could have maybe a set of rules, or maybe you're coming from somewhere that doesn't have that set of rules, but you're adjusting from whatever your household life was before to a campus life where you have more freedom to decide and you have more freedom to interact. And at home, you might have had lights out at X time or some of those pieces without a lot of justification or reason. And so you don't see the impact that you have on others. And hopefully, right, if a roommate comes to you with a concern, they come to it with an approach of, this is impacting me in this way, right? And hopefully our students, and I think a lot of our students maybe don't see that impact right away of me watching YouTube videos till 5 a.m, right? I don't see that impact on my roommates, but it could be having an impact. And just having that conversation, I think a lot of our students are more receptive to that feedback than are willing to give that feedback sometimes. And so it's scary getting over that hurdle. Sometimes our CAs are really good at role playing and practicing some of these conversations too. And so that could be a really good tip of, if you want to practice a conversation that you're really dreading with a roommate or a different a friend or whatever, our CAs would definitely help you navigate some of those pieces as you're trying to figure out what to say or how to say those items.
You bring up a really good point. That practice piece is essential, right? We talk about the roommate experience as practice for life in the long term, but I think knowing what to say in that moment, so using your resources. I think the other thing that your experience kind of sheds light on is it opens up the door to have a caring conversation with your roommate. And maybe a couple weeks after this behavior, if you haven't addressed the behavior, but just to say, hey, I'm kind of worried about you. I see you sleeping all day and now you're up until 5. How's it going in class? Do you need to get connected someplace? Not that your roommate is necessarily your responsibility, but as a caring community, are there some things that you can help support them with and get them connected to? And I think, our students, like Nathaniel said, really have a lot of freedom when they come to college, right? And part of adulting is learning how to navigate all of that time in a meaningful way. And so the first couple of semesters, some students really struggle academically because they're trying to navigate that, or they really want to work a job and make a lot of money, but then academics kind of fall second or third or fourth. And so finding that balance for you as a student is critical.
I think that's a really good point, and that is one of my biggest regrets now, looking back, knowing what I know now, is that my roommate probably needed some support, and I didn't recognize it at the time. I didn't really think about it. I was kind of more just frustrated, honestly. But I think being willing to think, can I offer some kind of hey, let me walk with you to tutoring, or let me walk with you over to the counseling center, and let's just get you connected with someone who can help you maybe adjust your sleep schedule or talk through some of the reasons why you might be staying up so late.
But I think you now have that experience, right, to lean on your professional world to say to students, hey, this is probably kind of out of bounds, so how do we get you back on track?
Yeah, and the piece of our residents aren't alone, and right, like, and Becky touched on this too, they're not responsible for their roommate, right? And so maybe looping in a staff member or even a CA, right? Like, those staff members are trained to maybe pick up on things that, you know, a resident isn't trained to pick up on. And so maybe something that was a frustration to you could be a point of concern for a CA, or, you know, a hall director, and that could get addressed in maybe a different way and help support, you know, all of our residents.
That probably leads into the community assistant role, right? So we spend a lot of time training our community assistants on communication pieces, navigating roommate conflicts, how to have difficult conversations, to the point that they practice it almost every single day in training as to how to have these conversations. Because we have found when people can put the actual words in their mouth and say it to another human being, they are much more likely to do it when the real situation occurs. And so I think leaning upon our community assistants, who are wonderful, to make support and provide support is helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout out. The community assistants go through so much training, and I think they're really in tune with the resources on campus and very well aware of how to connect you or your roommate with, you know, the different resources that you might need. And yeah, I think they're a wonderful set of people on campus that do a lot of hard work for us. Is there anything else you would want students to know about their CAs or about their resident hall directors?
Yeah, I think CAs wise, I think they care, right? I think sometimes I definitely think there are times where we all have maybe the same goal in mind, and that goal is we want our students to be successful, and we want our students to have a great living environment, a great experience. And our CAs are really, really good advocates for our students in the residence halls, right? They are really our frontline, staff members in the halls. I would say our custodians are probably right next to those staff members. And so we do take a lot of value in what our CAs and our custodians and what the people that are working with our students on a daily basis, let us know, because there are 4,500 students on campus, and we have 134 CAs that are helping those students navigate their campus experience. But then there's only a few of us that are trying to help navigate kind of that big picture. And so we do rely heavily on our staff that get to live that experience and put a lot of value on that. I think our hall directors sometimes maybe get confused with a super CA, or that they don't understand that role. Our hall directors are full-time professional staff members. Some of them might be pursuing graduate degrees or just getting done with a graduate degree or debating about pursuing a graduate degree, but they are full-time professional staff member roles. And really, I think for a lot of us, for both Becky and I, was our entrance to student affairs as professionals, right? And is a really great opportunity to learn there, but they also really help bridge what is happening in the residence halls with the bigger picture of what our department is doing. But we love having a full-time professional in the halls, being able to respond to crisis, being able to be present for students in maybe a different way than a CA could be. And so having that different level is really, really nice for a lot of student experience.
The biggest tip that I would say is get to know them. Right? Your CA should know your name, and you should know your CA's name. So if you don't know who they are, I encourage you to wander down the hallway and introduce yourself. Or our CAs have open office hours, right, where their door is open, they're kind of around, or they're planning events. Pop in and say hello, even if it's just to ask them how their day is going. Our CAs do this job because they care about the people in their community, and so you spending some time getting to know them and you really goes a long ways. Same thing with your RHGs, right? They have offices in the buildings. They most of the time have their doors open when they're available. So just popping in and saying hi, they're an incredible resource for you, both with really, really good things, but also if there are some things that you're struggling with. So getting to invest in that relationship too.
And I think this kind of goes into the next question about connecting with your community. But it does seem to me that a lot of the students that really take the time to connect to their CAs or their resident hall directors, they eventually go on to become CAs and probably then resident hall directors. So how would you recommend students get involved in their community?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to take your question back one layer. The first thing that I would say is if you are struggling getting to know the people on your floor and your building, is to consider when you're around just hanging out, keeping your door open, right? I think sometimes we miss the informal interaction pieces, either in the restroom when we're brushing our teeth at the sink or when people are kind of milling about on a Thursday night. But in terms of formal ways to connect in the building, so there are opportunities with our hall governments. These are students who are interested in planning events or providing feedback on the buildings. They are led by your hall director, and a leader is elected out of peers, and just a chance to engage and improve your community. I think we see our student leaders in the buildings, like you mentioned, become CAs. And so if you're interested in that role eventually, I think, again, understanding the CA role, getting involved on hall government or other leadership opportunities across campus will really help.
Yeah, and I think back to just Becky's original point of just getting to know your CA, I think is that step one, right? A lot of our, when we talk to our CAs or our CA applicants, when we talk about what inspired you to be a CA, it's usually a person, right? And usually that person is their CA. Most of the time, like 95% of the time, is a positive experience that they have with their CA. And sometimes it is, I want to do better than the person that I saw that was on my floor, right? But we do see that a lot of. We did an activity with our CAs where we said, what inspired you to be a CA? What inspired you to do this role? And we expected them to put, factual items down on that sheet, right on the board. And every single response was a name of a CA, either that they worked with or that was the CA when they were a resident. And so I think that was a very powerful message to hear from our student staff. And I think something that we carry with us is knowing that the best way for our students to connect to our department are through, CAs and through the experiences that they have with the department.
For me, when I was an undergrad, I think about, you're in college and you're trying to figure out who you are and where you fit. And my freshman year, I got connected to hall government and I found some friends that way. But it was when I got involved in student leadership through Residence Hall Association and then eventually being a CA, that was when I was like, oh, this is my community. This is where I was meant to land. So for some of our CAs, we see that, right? That's their people, and we're really grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think our undergraduate experiences were probably fairly different as far as that goes, right? So for me, I was still really connected to my CA. We threw him a surprise birthday party on our floor. His girlfriend at the time, now wife, helped almost all of us in all of our math classes, right? There were connections that we made with them that are really valuable connections. But because of him, leading some of the programming, and you don't really recognize it as programming at the time, it's just guys hanging out in the residence halls is what it felt like. But, 4 people from my floor were the ushers for my wedding, and the people in that community and some of the work that the CA did in that community to get us connected and, have us have really enjoyable experiences, led to deeper connections that I had that I probably would appreciate a little bit more in a different way in my role now than maybe I would have maybe not connected those dots not being in this role.
So I was the student that I went to a school that I did not know anybody at my university. And I was extremely shy, very introverted. It was pulling teeth to get me to go to any of the events. And I hear a lot of go to your events, go to these things. What would you say to the person who was like me, who it was just it was extremely painful? Because I was very I will say this, I was terrible at connecting on my campus. And I didn't connect until I moved away from campus and was in a job and working closely with people. But I wish I would have connected on campus. What do you say to that person that is really shy, just feels like it's painful to go out and to participate in these things, especially if they don't know anybody?
I think what I think about with that is picking a low entry, low risk thing to try that wouldn't push you totally out of your comfort zone. You might not want to go pie your CA, but maybe you'd be willing to go watch the movie that's happening during Hobo Weekend, and pick something that has a low threshold entry. I also sometimes can be shy, so I try and find a best friend who is usually outgoing and interested in that kind of stuff, and then I just kind of tag along and then kind of wait to see what happens. So I think just trying it and being willing to give something, at least like in my house, we use the 3-bite rule. You have to try something 3 times. So like maybe it's like the 3 tries rule, right? Like I'm going to try it 3 times, and hopefully with each try, it'll get a little bit easier and less uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think a lot of our CAs, not all of them, right, but a lot of them are in the role because they might be a little bit more extroverted, not the entire population, right? But I know one thing that I think for me that sometimes when I like don't want to participate in an event is I just don't necessarily, maybe I don't see the value in it, but I don't see like what am I contributing to that, or the piece I want people to know is our CAs genuinely celebrate when they have people go to their events and celebrate when they have a resident, go have coffee with them or go to dinner with them, or they are hopeful to engage with our residents, and there's somebody on the other end that's appreciating you participating, right? And I think sometimes you don't, you almost put that burden on yourself of like, nobody's going to miss me if I'm there, but people are going to really notice you while you're there, especially our CAs as they're, we hope our CAs, right, are planning programs and are doing things that are kind of that low risk piece, because we recognize we have a lot of campus partners that are hosting, larger scale programming that really is really engaging and is important part of campus life, but how do our CAs fit within that, right? So being able to host a program that might have 5 to 10 people is really, really important in the residence hall community, because that's something that's really accessible to a student and is, you just have to walk down to the kitchen or across the hall to have that first entry, and maybe you meet somebody there that helps get you to that next kind of threshold of event.
And I think the CA can be a safe, because like you said, like taking a friend with you. And I think of the CA as like, that's a safe bet that you could go to your CA and say, I really want to try this event, or I want to go to something. And I'm not saying that your CA is going to like be able to go to every single thing with you, but if they can, I would almost bet that most of them would help you find someone else who's going to go to that or event or be interested in going to something. And I think like it sounds like kind of the answer to all of these questions has been like, go to your CA, because that's really like they are your person, your go-to. That's their job, is to be there for you and to help you connect.
And I think, right, so I lived on a floor my freshman year that had one really great CA and then one that was not great. And we all went to the one who was really, really great. So if your CA, like you don't connect with them or there isn't a good click or vibe, that's fine. Find a different CA who you could say, hey, I want to go to dinner, or you want to try the ramen place, or whatever it might be.
So last piece here, what would you say for a student who maybe has questions or concerns about their roommate, and what should they do when it's like, I don't know who to talk to, but I am really concerned about this situation or my roommate, my relationship with my roommate?
Yeah, I think one of the big pieces is if you start to have that feeling at all, like I think that it's good that you're identifying that feeling, right? It is overwhelming to maybe not know what to do with it. The CA, the hall director, depending on what it is, counseling services, I think there's a lot of different opportunities. Kind of back to what I was saying before is all of our community assistants are really well trained. Our hall director team are really well trained to identify what that concern might be. And so we're not asking students to be the caretakers of their peers, but being able to get somebody there to help is really, really important as we start to navigate, some of those pieces, right? And our CAs are like actively trained to recognize pieces. They have formal mental health training. They work with our, our counseling team on some of that pieces, our hall director team on those pieces. The piece that I think sometimes maybe our residents might be hesitant to come to pro staff or come to somebody that's a staff member is that like, oh, if I like let somebody know, all of a sudden the SWAT is going to get sent in and it's going to be this big like show of something, and they don't want it to become something bigger than they just want to help their friend, or they just want to help their roommate, or they just want to have ask a couple questions. And our team is really good about meeting people where they need to be met, and it's not something that is always this big extravagant thing that's going to happen. It might be one or two resources for that person. It might be a conversation, or it might be something that's more ongoing, but we're not going to make it something that it's not. And I think a lot of times we feel like it's either on like this end of the extreme that somebody's not doing well or somebody is doing well. And there's a lot of gray area that we work in between, and we see that on a daily basis, and we work in that area very well.
The thing that a CA can offer in a roommate situation is, one, they're a peer, and two, in addition to their training, right, this isn't likely their first roommate issue that they've managed, and so they can help you navigate what is normal versus what is out of bounds versus what is an extreme situation that we need to deal with right now. Now, I will add this caveat, right? Sometimes we need a little bit of additional support. So if you are outreaching to your CA and you feel like the situation is not being resolved or escalating, right, that's where getting your hall director involved is a really great next step. But starting with the CA is the first place to go.
Well, I think that's really helpful information. Any last things that you want to add, or anything you wish that people would take away from this conversation, or that they would keep in mind if they're going to remember something from what we've been talking about today?
The thing that I think about with living on campus, and SCSU has a 2-year live-on requirement, is that you only have this opportunity once in your life, and to do your very best to make the most of it, because I can assure you, in hearing Nathaniel's comments and thinking back of our own experiences, right, like, it's a pretty magical time. So if things aren't going well, speaking up, but also enjoying it and taking full advantage.
Yeah, I think that's probably the same lines as that. I have friends that, now in my after, postgraduate life that were CAs, or people talk about their experiences on campus very fondly, right? We have a group of alumni that are going to come tour one of our residence halls, and that's something that the Alumni Association lined up for the first time this academic year. And people are genuinely excited to come back in the residence halls because of the not because of probably the building, right? Not because of the physical structure, but because of the experiences that they had with their peers at that time. And sometimes you might not appreciate those things in the moment. Hopefully there's lots of things you appreciate in the moment of, maybe a late night movie night, or maybe an early study session, or whatever those things are in those moments. But I really, really hope that there's a lot of opportunities that you're going to look back and have fond memories of what you're doing in the residence halls.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, I talk about this with well-being a lot too, but what you put into your experience, the effort you put into it, the willingness you have to go out and engage and connect, it's all about how much effort you're willing to put into it. And so what you put into it is what you will get out of it. And so just try to commit to yourself to saying yes to events when your CA invites you, joining your friends when they ask you to go for coffee, but just trying to say yes more and put as much effort as you can into it, because that's where those memories are going to come from, and where the appreciation later on, I think, is where that's going to come from. Well, thank you so much both for being here and being a guest on the podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to seeing you both on campus.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.